sorry. It is my privilege to introduce to you Ruth Carlson. She is the Executive Director of the Eagle Forum Education Center in St. Louis. One of her newest activities is creating webinars. She's doing one of these for MOPS to assist in communicating, educating, and training throughout the state. This tool has tremendous promise, and I personally can hardly wait for it to get up because it'll save us lots and lots of miles. She was a delegate to the Missouri Republican Caucus and state conventions in 04 and 08, and attended the 08 National Republican Convention, though not as a delegate. In her free time, she is active in church, a willing campaign volunteer, and a citizens activist and advisor to the Missouri Precinct Project. Please join me in welcoming Ruth Carlson.
Well, I'm honored to be here, but there are so many here that I know are veterans and have been involved so much longer than I have, so sometimes it's just a bit humbling to be asked to speak to people who I know a lot more than I do. And I also commend you for being here, for giving up an entire Saturday to come and be involved in government. I don't think that there's enough praise that we can give to people who give and sacrifice of their own personal time and energy and money to attend conferences like this. And I especially want to thank the MOP leadership, Anita and Frida and Judy and other people who've been involved, because I know that it's your own personal time and money and energy, even more so than people in attending, that made sure this was possible. And I know that one thing is certain, that we will not have a country unless there's people like Frida and Judy and Anita who are willing to basically invest in these ideas to educate other people. And I thank you, and I thank them for their willingness to trust me with 15 minutes, so I'll try and respect that very much. So my speech today is titled, "The Most Important Office Isn't the President of the United States," which is based off of a brochure that you can find in your packet. And I work for Eagle Forum. Phyllis Schlafly is the author of this particular pamphlet. You can order it from Eagle Forum so that you can have them to distribute and to recruit other people and to inspire them. And you might say, well, wait a second, isn't the President of the United States the leader of the Western world and someone who has all of this this powerful power? Well, yes, he's probably the most powerful man in the world, but the presidency is not the most powerful office in the world. Another office is more powerful because it chooses whose names will appear on the ballot for elective office, and what will be the policies of the political parties that provide the major support for those candidates. To understand why this office is so powerful, you must understand the 7 steps of government, and those are outlined in the pamphlet, and I'm just going to briefly outline them for you right now. So first, to change things, you have to change the law. It's very important to understand that rules determine outcomes, even more so the law. So if you see things you want to change, you have to change the laws. So where are there things that we want to change about our country? The taxes, deficits, schools, crime, abortion, gay rights, governmental funding of anti-social projects, government overregulation, or even government subsidizing business, which was the main topic of the special session here in Missouri. Our Constitution makes Congress the most powerful branch of government. It can pass laws, impose taxes, and spend our money. State legislatures are powerful as well, very powerful over the public schools. So if you don't like the present policies, what are we going to do about it? That's why we're all here. Our Constitution gives us a way to remedy laws, policy, and taxes. Members of the House of Representatives and Congress and the lower houses of each state representative in turn, they run every 2 years. Every 2 years, we have the ability to change laws. So the first thing we always have to remember is to change things, we have to change the law. Secondly, to change laws, you have to change the people who make them. I know that at the Eagle Forum, we spend a lot of time sending out alerts so that people can contact their representatives to tell them, this is how we think you should vote or how you should think about things. But deep down, I kind of know, I think Todd Aiken's going to vote a certain way, and I think Russ Carnahan's going to vote a certain way. And so unfortunately, I think on the federal level, sometimes we can call them, but when it comes down to it, if you've got a person of integrity who believes in limited government, they're going to vote generally a certain way, and people on the other side are going to vote a certain way. At the same time, there are things like the patent reform bill that just went through Congress that I do think that Eagle Forum had a major play in influencing people to vote the right way on that. Unfortunately, it still passed and was signed by Obama, and the patent system in America has now changed from first to invent to first to file. I don't know if you know that or not. So Congress and the state legislatures pass thousands of laws every year. No citizen or group can possibly read and research all of them to find out in advance or alert our friends to go with a letter writing campaign and phone calling. Congressional and state legislators who've been elected by liberal and anti-family groups will not be receptive to our messages. The best way for our values to be represented is for you and I to elect someone who believes and shares our values and who's honest and has integrity. If we want to change the law or the taxes, we must be electing representatives we can rely on and count on to vote conservative, pro-family, all of the time. So to change the laws, we have to change the people who make those laws. The third principle, to be elected, your candidate must be on the ballot. How often have we voted for the lesser of two evils when we didn't like either of those candidates running for an important office? Have we ever wondered why? Why do we keep ending up in the same place? Despite all the rhetoric, both candidates seem to back the same sort of agendas. Some may be a little bit slower, moving in that direction slower than the others. How many times has a good conservative not made it to the ballot, onto the ballot? So to get on the ballot, you have to win the primary, and you have to be nominated. And in different states, that happens in different ways. The winners in party primaries or convention will be the candidates who appear on the ballot in November. Except for very rare occasions, all candidates, they must win this primary. Third candidates are possible, but unless a candidate has as much money as Ross Perot, running for a third-party candidate probably won't be successful. And I think even in my experience, I think election laws actually work against third-party candidates even making it to the ballot because it takes so much time and energy just to get on the ballot. And that's why the primary process is so important, and that's why it's important to understand how the party works. And because it's different in every state, the brochure that we've handed out has one weakness in that it's meant to be used in all 50 states. And so John Putnam is going to be speaking after me to speak specifically to a lot of how the party works here in Missouri. Because in certain states like Utah, it's a convention, that's how you win a primary. In Missouri, it is generally by election. But in special circumstances, like special elections, it's actually the party committees who make nominations. For example, in St. Louis County, we had a race. There's a new office for auditor. Actually, it's not a new office, but instead of being appointed, it's elected. So we had one, it was the St. Louis County Republican Committee who selected the Republican candidate. And in this particular instance, it was a perfect example of how there was a sort of an establishment candidate, someone who'd been involved in politics for a very long time. And so he had a lot of support simply because he'd been in politics and he had supposedly more name ID. And then you had a newer candidate who had actually been in the real estate business and seemed like a better candidate but didn't have as many connections. So he kind of was at a disadvantage, and it went to the Central Committee and it came down to like one vote. And the newer, less experienced politician sort of candidate won the vote at the Central Committee. And it came down to more conservatives being on the Central Committee than the more establishment candidates. And then because he didn't actually end up going on to win that election, but I think that has to do with the county being leaning Democrat and really not having a strong structure, not having people who are walking door to door and not having a really effective way to turn out voters in the county. But then another example is the Democrat candidate was a state representative. So because he gave up his position, that means there's another special election. So again, you had the Republican committee and the Democrat committee who chose the nominees for what would be the special election because they didn't hold an elective primary. So while we have primaries in Missouri, it's still very important to have conservatives on the Central Committee and part of those committees for when you have special elections to make sure it's the conservative who wins the nomination. And of course, the election in New York, that was the special election that was the big deal. I think it was New York 27, where you had a liberal Republican committee that chose a nomination that was more liberal. So there's lots of examples on how the Republican committee is important. Those offices are important for making sure conservative gets the nomination. Candidates endorsed by the party usually win the primary election. That's point number 5 in the brochure. This point needs a little explaining because some party organizations will claim not to endorse candidates before the primary, but favoritism towards those certain candidates is like an endorsement. I'd say that this is the case especially in St. Louis County. I don't know about other areas, but a lot of Republican groups, including the Central Committee, will say we don't endorse in the primary. But I think there's such clear favoritism towards certain candidates that it's almost like an endorsement. A recent example has to do with the new 2nd congressional district race where you have Ed Martin opposing Ann Wagner. And Chris Christie is coming to Missouri for the GOP, for some sort of GOP event, and it turns out that somebody asked Chris Christie or introduced him to Ann Wagner, and he's now doing an Ann Wagner event. And Ed Martin was never given the opportunity to necessarily have Chris Christie come in and do a fundraiser for him and all these different things. But basically, even though Ann Wagner does not have the Republican endorsement, she is receiving favoritism from the party, which essentially becomes like an endorsement. And that's why you have to have enough conservatives, enough people like us involved in that structure so that you don't have that favoritism happening if you're not going to allow endorsements, or you're the one influencing that favoritism. Because I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily against supporting conservative candidates if they're the best candidate. I mean, the people who are showing up are running the show. And if we're not showing up, then we're not going to be part of making some of those decisions. Secondly, only a minority of Americans vote in primary elections. These voters might simply vote for the first candidate who knocks on their door or whose name they've heard on the radio without even knowing other candidates are in the race before the primary. Most voters don't investigate primary candidates or even find out who they are. A great example of how walking to door is the best strategy for a state representative candidate comes from a district in West St. Louis County. The district had 3 candidates. It had one young man who just got out there and walked the district. There was another guy who had been a staffer for Jim Talent and basically got all of Jim Talent's old phone lists and just planned on calling all of those people and putting up yard signs there and doing some sort of, radio and some ads. And then there was a third guy who thought, you know what, I'm just going to walk towards the end and I'll be the second candidate that goes around and they'll meet me and I'm a little bit more middle-aged and might seem a little bit more mature and ready for being a state representative. Well, who do you think won this race? The first guy, the young guy who went door to door, met the voters, and because they met him first, he was known by them. And once someone says, I'm going to vote for you, or they commit to putting a yard sign out in their yard, they're going to keep that commitment. And that's a great example for how going door to door, it's Koenig, Representative, I think it's Andrew Koenig, is the young man. And we went to the same church for a while, and I remember meeting him early on. I went over to his house with one of Judy Hahn, a committee woman, and I just said, you know what? I'm done. Oh, wow. Okay. So I thought that I timed this out pretty well. But
take 5 of mine. You gave me some.
Oh, okay. I'll take 5. Sorry. Mine only says 13 and a half. Okay, so anyways, but it was really exciting because I basically said, because my mom's on the, has been, or she still is on the Central Committee in St. Louis County, And so I've been involved since before I could even vote, handing out literature for candidates. And there was a candidate in North County, and he walked door to door. And he walked his district 3 times. And so in a district now that like a Republican, the last time that there was a Republican this last time, he got 35% of the vote. And 6 or 8 years ago, it was a Republican who was there. And it's because he walked door to door. And you don't have to, when you meet someone and people see that you're just a regular person and you can win votes without necessarily being partisan, is what I'm trying to say. And so I told Andrew, I said, you know what, just walk. Just get out there and walk and walk and walk and walk and walk, and you will meet the voters, and you will be able to win this. That's how you win on the local level. And he went out and did that. He just stayed very focused, and he met voters, and that's what everyone in this room is going to have to do. We're going to have to find that time, we're going to have to block that time off, and we're going to have to go meet people in our neighborhoods. So I think I kind of went on a little bit about how, a majority of people, when they go to the primary, they don't necessarily know who they're going to vote for. And the Missouri Precinct Project is about going out there, being strategic, finding those voters, and making sure when they get to the polls, they know the best candidate to vote for because we've educated them. So candidates endorsed by the party usually win the primary, which means candidates who have the support structure, that have people in the grassroots who are out there supporting them, those are going to be the people that win the primaries. Ed Martin needs support. He needs grassroots people out there walking. And that's my own opinion. That's not the opinion of Eagle Forum or MOP or anyone else. That's Ruth Carlson's personal opinion. And it's important to be involved in the candidate process. So let's see here. So 7, it's easy to be elected a precinct committee person. That's the 7th principle, which is basically the people who show up are the people who are basically going to reap the benefits of that. There's a lot of these positions that are empty. It's going to a boring meeting once a month or whatever. Some of this stuff is just really tedious kinds of work, and it's the people who show up who make the decisions. And you can find, if there's an empty place, you can get appointed to it, you can challenge someone, or if they're a great person already in that position, you don't need to challenge them, you can just support them in that township position. Or I think there's even a point of, even if they're a poor committee person, if it would be a difficult challenge, just get out there and walk your area, because you don't have to be the official elected person to have a huge influence in all of this process. So I think there's a number of ways that you can go about it. So it's just always just the principles. To change things, we have to change the law. To change the laws, you have to change the people who make them. To be elected, the candidate has to be on the ballot. To get on the ballot in November, you've got to win the primary. So we've got to be the most strategic that we can to win the primaries, and meeting voters face-to-face is the most effective way to do it. So we need to find the voters who are most likely going to agree with us. We need to visit them, we need to make sure they have the information they have, and we need to turn them out. And that's how we can be effective. So it matters who's in office, it matters who's in these structures. It's important to be strategic, and the committee process is really the process that we have. So I'm just going to conclude with that, because our involvement matters. It matters very much that we're in this room. It matters very much that this project is happening in Missouri, and I think that we're blessed to have such a strategic group of people and movement and people here today. Thank you very much.